Taniguchi Naya, a 24-year-old employee, worked at Aeon Mall, a massive suburban shopping center that sold everything from food and clothing to electronics and furniture. Something about the place felt off, though, and it all started when he received a transfer letter with an unreadable destination. That day, after wrapping up his shift, Taniguchi left the staff-only room and thanked his boss, though he was a little annoyed he was the last one heading home while everyone else had already left. As he walked, he debated where to eat since hunger was starting to hit, but his thoughts kept circling back to the strange transfer letter. Despite reaching out to the main office for clarification, he had yet to get a response. How was he supposed to prepare if he didn't even know where he was being sent? Just as he was lost in thought, a strange feeling washed over him. Turning around, he spotted a rabbit crossing his path. But this wasn't an ordinary rabbit. It was the size of a minivan. Before he could process what he was seeing, two massive birds soared past him. A forest, one that definitely hadn't been there before, loomed nearby. Panic set in. This was supposed to be Kasugano's Aeon Mall, so how had the surroundings changed so drastically? The mall itself was still standing, but everything else was different. The sky was darker, the Milky Way swirled above, and a horned rabbit the size of a car stood nearby. And then he noticed something else. Perched on the mall's rooftop was a dragon. Hoping this was some kind of bizarre dream, he pinched himself, but the pain confirmed it was real. That unreadable transfer letter? It wasn't a mistake. He had actually been transferred to an Isekai version of Aeon Mall. Memories of earlier that day came rushing back. Right before everything changed, he had stepped on an event gimmick in the employees-only area. The floor had trembled beneath him and glowing patterns appeared. In the chaos, he had rushed back to the staff-only room, only to find a girl standing there waiting for him. The girl congratulated him on successfully crossing over. Confused, but trying to keep his composure, Taniguchi thanked her before quickly realizing something was very wrong. Snapping out of it, he started bombarding her with questions. Who she was, what was going on, and whether this was actually an isekai. Unfazed, the girl calmly confirmed his suspicions. Introducing herself as Ayori from the HR department, she explained that she was there to brief him on his new assignment. At first, her name didn't ring a bell, but then it hit him. She was the one who had sent that mysterious transfer letter. The same one who had ignored all his attempts to get an explanation. Ayori sighed, saying that even if she had explained everything earlier, he wouldn't have believed her. She then thanked Taniguchi for showing up for the transfer and told him his new posting was right here, Aeon Mall Isekai. Taniguchi, still trying to process everything, quickly asked her to slow down. She was skipping too much information. What exactly was Aeon Mall Isekai? And why did an entirely different world have an Aeon Mall? Ayori, unfazed, nodded, saying she understood his confusion. She explained that 5 years ago, a certain location in Japan had mysteriously connected to another world. The transfer gate between them worked using Isekai technology, stabilizing the wavelength between the two worlds. When the wavelengths matched, even if only for a brief moment, people could travel back and forth through the gate. And the place that got connected? None other than Aeon Mall Kasugano. Once the senior management realized this, they launched a top-secret plan to open a branch in this other world. Taniguchi was speechless for a moment before blurting out, "Wait, so you're telling me the entire company's senior management has lost their minds?" Ignoring his outburst, Eri continued, explaining that there was a cycle for when the wavelengths matched for humans. Every 6 months, large shipments of goods and raw materials could be transported. Smaller batches, around 3 cage carts worth, could be exchanged every 2 to 4 weeks. As for sending and receiving data, that could be done roughly every 3 to 7 days. The idea was to gradually stockpile materials until Aeon Mall Isekai was fully operational. Still in disbelief, Taniguchi asked why he, of all people, had been chosen. There had to be better candidates in the company. He even pleaded with her not to tell him it was because he had no family. Ayori cleared her throat and fixed him with a knowing look. "You said you wanted to do business somewhere interesting." Taniguchi froze. His mind flashed back to a conversation he'd had with his boss. Back then, he had casually mentioned that instead of staying in Kasugano, he'd rather be posted somewhere remote, maybe even an island or, if possible, overseas. His boss had chuckled and asked, "What about another world?" At the time, Taniguchi had laughed it off, saying it sounded interesting. Having lost his parents young and later his grandparents, he had no real attachments. The challenge of bringing Aeon Mall's appeal to another world actually intrigued him. Now, remembering all of this, Taniguchi tensed. Yeah, he had said that during his job interview. Ayori smirked, complimenting his sharp memory. Exactly what you'd expect from an elite employee at the main office. She even pulled out a copy of his original application form. Under preferred locations, he had circled Japan, overseas, and, most damning of all, Isekai. Taniguchi's face turned red. That was a joke! I didn't think it actually meant another world. He groaned, realizing he had completely brought this upon himself. After a deep breath, he asked the most important question. Could he actually go back? The worlds connected every 6 months, right? Eri confirmed that he could return when the cycle allowed. If he wanted to resign, that was also possible, but even then he'd have to wait until the next window opened. Taniguchi's frustration simmered as he dragged his luggage through the eerily quiet mall. The thought of being unceremoniously thrown into this bizarre situation gnawed at him. He still couldn't wrap his head around the fact that a Japanese supermarket was running in another world, much less that he was now in charge of it.
The girl said, "You are now the manager of this branch. According to the policy, local hiring from this world is allowed. You also have to supervise everything and ensure that the sales goal is achieved." Taniguchi asked her. He only has 3 years of experience, and he's really becoming a manager. When he inquired about the sales goal, the girl informed him that it was 100 million yen in Japanese currency. Taniguchi was completely stunned, as if his soul had just floated away. Meanwhile, Iori carried on, casually mentioning that, by coincidence, this place followed a calendar almost identical to Japan's 12 months a year, 30 days each. Doing a quick calculation, Taniguchi realized he'd have to pull in about 3.4 million yen in sales every single day. That number hit him hard. He immediately blurted out, asking if only a single section of the supermarket was even up and running. The thought of reaching 100 million yen in sales every month felt ridiculous. To make things worse, stock shipments were limited to just 3 cage carts every few weeks. No matter how he tried to wrap his head around it, the math just wasn't adding up. But instead of answering, Iori stayed on track, telling him to use the provided laptop to place orders for anything he needed. Frustrated, Taniguchi snapped, accusing her of dodging his questions on purpose. Yet, she acted as if she didn't even hear him and continued relaying more details. She casually dropped the news that his personal belongings had already been delivered. On top of that, she pointed out that the empty tenant space nearby could be used as his living quarters if he wanted, but only as a rare exception. Still confused, Taniguchi pressed for answers about his stuff, but Iori brushed it aside, saying there wasn't enough time to go into details. If he wanted more info, he'd have to ask the previous manager when they showed up for work the next day. Then, without missing a beat, she mentioned that if monthly sales didn't hit the target, Aon Mall Isekai would be shut down. Even so, the most critical thing was keeping the transfer gate stable. As she was about to disappear, Taniguchi yelled, demanding to know what would happen if the gate wasn't secured. Without much emotion, Iori simply stated that the connection would weaken, making it harder to return. Before he could get another word in, she vanished. Oh, just like that, a guy with only 3 years of work experience was suddenly in charge of Aon Mall Isekai, starting tomorrow. Not long after, he noticed his stuff was actually there. For a brief moment, relief washed over him. At least he had his belongings. But soon, that relief turned into annoyance. The thought of someone randomly going through his things without permission irritated him to no end. As he paced around with his luggage, his frustration only grew.
He found himself wondering why Aeon was so unnecessarily large, with all the tenant spaces empty, giving him the freedom to pick any one of them. Despite that, Taniguchi remained engulfed in despair. It wasn't until later, when he checked, that he realized everything, his furniture, appliances, clothes, books, and personal belongings, had been delivered. The document accompanying the delivery explained that Aeon would take care of his home during his absence. His family, originally farmers, had a vast piece of unused land, which Aeon had agreed to look after, relieving Taniguchi of that burden. The promotion he had received had brought significant changes, a salary increase, and numerous benefits that had more than doubled his pay. Along with that came a ring, a translation ring, which, as per the office, would automatically translate any conversation as long as he wore it. He found himself puzzled by the technology behind it. Still unsure if the ring would work as he hadn't been able to test it, he selected a place to stay and, in doing so, realized he had no idea how the toilet worked. Upon checking, he found the flush was working fine, and even the wall socket had electricity. It was clear that he couldn't confirm everything just from observing the mall's interior, but for now, all he needed was sleep. After lying down on the bed, he looked at the shutter, wondering if closing it would be enough to keep out any potential threats. But as he thought of the dragon he had seen on the rooftop, he figured the shutter wouldn't do much against something like that. Exhausted, Taniguchi decided to put off worrying about it until tomorrow, his patience worn thin. He then realized he had forgotten about dinner and wondered what the food would be like in this strange new world. The next morning, Taniguchi woke to a breathtaking sunrise. The air felt incredibly fresh, and he wondered if it was the surroundings that gave it that quality. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling of wanting it all to be a dream. Unfortunately, when he opened his eyes, nothing had changed. A large bird caught his attention, soaring through the sky. He could tell it was dangerous and definitely a carnivore. He thought it might even hunt humans. Taniguchi reflected on his situation. Despite not graduating from a top university, he had somehow ended up working for Aeon, a prestigious company. It all came down to his comment about how conducting business in another world would be an interesting challenge, and, more importantly, his lack of family, which seemed to have made him an easy target for a company like Aeon. He also recalled Iori's words about how, even if he quit, it would take half a year before he could return home. If that was the case, he might as well commit to the work and try to enjoy it. Trying to stay optimistic, he thought that this could be an isekai, and maybe there would be beautiful women or even elves to meet. Just as the thought crossed his mind, a girl appeared out of nowhere, shouting at him and demanding to know who he was. Before he could react, a sword was suddenly pointed at him, and he froze in tense fear. Taniguchi felt a wave of nervousness as he questioned if it was really a sword pointed at him. Out of nowhere, he found himself in an incredibly tight spot. But then, to his astonishment, he realized he could understand the girl's language. The girl asked what exactly he was. Taniguchi felt a small sense of relief as the translation ring seemed to be working, though he was surprised to find that he understood her language even without it. Still, he wasn't sure if they could hold a proper conversation. Frustration bubbled inside him as he longed to just go back home. The sword moved dangerously close to his neck, and in a panic, he blurted out that he was going to be the new manager at the Aeon Mall in this new world. The girl, clearly shocked, demanded to know if they had been waiting just for her to pass by, of all places, to humiliate her like that. Taniguchi was baffled by her words, and confused, he asked, "What?" He realized that if she decided to strike, he would be in serious trouble. To his surprise, the girl reacted even more strangely, shouting that if he had said he would attack, it meant he was planning to pounce on her. This, she declared, was the worst possible start to her morning. As she began swinging her sword around awkwardly, Taniguchi tensed up, now even more on edge. She apologized to her parents, claiming that her purity had been ruined right then and there. Terrified, Taniguchi nervously pleaded for her to wait, warning her that swinging the sword like that could be dangerous. But she didn't listen, continuing to move the sword in erratic motions. He wondered if the translation ring wasn't working properly. Just then, the girl stumbled and fell to the ground when one of her shoes broke. Embarrassed, she admitted that he was the first man who had dared to speak to her. She went on to say that, as an elf, they would never yield, no matter what happened to their bodies. Taniguchi, still in a state of confusion, tried again, introducing himself as Taniguchi, and telling her that he would proudly take the role of manager at the Aeon Mall's branch in this world. He asked if she could hear him, and, noticing she had mentioned clocking in, he wondered if she was implying that she was fine with him being an employee of Aeon. Curious about her name, Taniguchi asked her to tell him. The girl, now more composed, answered, introducing herself with an extremely long name. Chloe Dupois, Christophe, Claudine, Virtue, Ondine. Taniguchi, hearing her long name, found it a bit tedious and boring. Minutes later, as the situation calmed down, Taniguchi explained everything that had transpired. Chloe, finally realizing the misunderstanding, apologized. She seemed relieved that he wasn't some villain trying to drag her into the shadows for unspeakable deeds. Taniguchi, glad the confusion was cleared, asked if her name was really that long. Chloe explained that her full name signified her heritage. She was Chloe, part of the Dupois family in the village of Vertu, protected by the spirit Ondine, with parents named Christophe and Claudine. Taken aback by her explanation, Taniguchi tried to process everything. Chloe added that if he wasn't an elf, he could just call her Chloe, as she had heard that in some places people introduce themselves in a simpler way. As he stood there staring at Chloe, Taniguchi couldn't help but think about her words. She had mentioned being an elf and wearing metal armor. Everything about her seemed a bit different from what he had initially imagined. Chloe, noticing Taniguchi's gaze, snapped, demanding to know what he was staring at. Embarrassed, she nervously asked if he was imagining her in such an awkward position. Taniguchi, feeling the tension rise, suggested they just forget about it. But then he reconsidered, thinking it wasn't the worst thing after all. Chloe, finally piecing everything together, realized that the manager from Japan, who she had been waiting for, was actually him. She revealed that she had been managing the shop all this time, keeping her promise to hold the fort until Taniguchi arrived. Chloe explained that she was counting on him now, as the long-awaited trading by a Japanese person was about to begin. Taniguchi, still trying to grasp everything, asked if it would be all right for him to observe on his first day to get a sense of how things worked at the Aeon Mall in the other world. Chloe, clearly excited, urged him to relax, promising that she would handle everything. After all, she was a holy knight. Taniguchi felt a twinge of anxiety as he wondered if things would really work out with this clumsy former manager. He also thought the whole holy knight thing seemed a bit much, especially for an elf female knight. The scene shifted to later in the evening, where Taniguchi felt utterly defeated and tense. The day had been a complete letdown, and he realized it undermined the entire purpose of being at the Aeon Mall. He recalled how Iori had mentioned that the operational supermarket section only included fresh produce. The main attraction at the Aeon Mall was the delightful fresh vegetables brought in by the local farmer's wife on her cart. Taniguchi was tense because, well, that was all there was, and it was roped off so they couldn't even access it. To make matters worse, there were spots showcasing Japanese products, which only added to his frustration. Taniguchi decided to try one of the vegetables, and after tasting it, he remarked that freshly picked veggies straight from the farm were fantastic. The sweetness of the veggies caught him by surprise, and he thought eating them chilled might be a good idea. He was also surprised to see so many customers, like adventurers and merchants with their carts. The road in front of the Aeon Mall had more traffic than he expected. However, despite the crowd, many of the customers seemed to be there only to grab a few veggies and take a break at the sparkling fountain or use the clean restroom nearby. At that point, Taniguchi started to feel like it might be better to close the shop since there was nothing in the mall that actually encouraged people to buy. Just then, Chloe came over and called his name. Taniguchi asked what was going on, and Chloe, looking puzzled, replied that he was the manager and it was time for the sales report. Taniguchi tensed up, clearly not wanting to hear it. Chloe explained that while customers usually came in after noon, they even had some visitors in the evening. She went on to share the sales for the day, which, when converted to Japanese yen, amounted to 1,600 yen. Taniguchi was stunned. Chloe proudly continued, saying that they had 42 customers that day. She even asked, in a slightly boastful tone, if it wasn't impressive that she could do the maths. Taniguchi, however, sank into despair when he realized the target was 100 million yen per month. This meant they needed around 3.4 million yen each day, and he was the one responsible for meeting that target. Seeing Taniguchi's distress, Chloe asked what was wrong. Then she suddenly realized she might have made a mistake with the decimal point and offered to explain it to him. Taniguchi, frustrated, exploded, shouting that the target was far too high. He pointed out that both the number of customers and the average purchase per customer were dismal, leaving them a long way from meeting their goals. Taniguchi, frustrated by the terrible sales, couldn't shake the bad feeling creeping over him. He suddenly shouted, demanding to know what was really going on. He thought about Iori and wondered what exactly he was supposed to do in this situation. Calling out Chloe's name, he caught her off guard. Chloe, flustered, asked if he was suggesting they actually do the work. Taniguchi, exhausted, replied that they should skip it for now. He declared there would be no more lounging around or just observing. Starting tomorrow, he would take charge as the store manager. He then added with a determined tone that he was counting on her. Chloe, brightening up, expressed how excited she was and couldn't wait to work with him. The next morning, Taniguchi woke up with a clear goal in mind. He needed to figure out exactly what to sell. After the mall closed the previous day, Taniguchi had done some research and discovered the major hurdle. He couldn't easily source supplies from Japan. While there was a decent stock of non-perishable food, replenishing it seemed risky. He needed to investigate what kinds of clothing and furniture were in demand in this otherworldly realm. He decided to visit the town to check out the local lifestyle and see what goods were being sold. Just then, Chloe arrived. Taniguchi greeted her with a good morning and asked why she was up so early, reminding her that he would be taking over as the manager from that day. Chloe excitedly replied that she was buzzing with energy, feeling more alive than she had since running away from the village. Taniguchi, teasingly, asked if she was acting like a kid before a field trip, but his attention shifted when she mentioned running away from home. Chloe, still excited, asked if there was anything she could help with. Taniguchi, seeing an opportunity, said it was perfect timing for her to pitch in. He asked if she could dig around a bit because he wanted to plant some seeds. Chloe, looking surprised, asked, "What? Are we talking about planting seeds?" Taniguchi, confused by her reaction, responded with a simple yes. He jokingly asked if her mind was still stuck in the world of a middle school boy. Meanwhile, Taniguchi found the specific seeds he wanted to grow. Chloe then asked if he wanted to create a field, to which Taniguchi corrected her, saying it wasn't a farm, just a lawn. He wanted to see if Japanese plants could take root. Chloe explained that the soil here was bare, and the dust was unbearable, so planting grass would be ideal as a training ground. It was wide and flat. Taniguchi, amused, replied that soldiers didn't get trained in fields. He teased Chloe, wondering if, as an elf, she wasn't more excited about greenery. He handed her a shovel and told her she could use it to dig. When Chloe took the shovel, she was stunned by how incredibly light it was for her. Taniguchi, alarmed, quickly asked her not to swing it around. He then instructed her to just turn over a bit of soil and plant some grass seeds. Noting that he wasn't sure they'd grow, so just a small amount would do. Chloe happily accepted, assuring Taniguchi that with the shovel she could dig to her heart's content. As she started digging, she gleefully praised the shovel's quality and how smooth the wheelbarrow was. Taniguchi, stunned by her speed, anxiously asked her to stop, saying they didn't need such a large area dug. Chloe paused, still enthusiastic, and remarked on how fantastic the shovel was and how light the wheelbarrow felt. She curiously asked what the wheelbarrow wheels were made of, and noted that if they had something like this for carts, it would sell like hotcakes. Taniguchi, realizing the absence of rubber products in this new world, pondered the implications. Chloe eagerly asked if all she had to do was plant the seeds, and Taniguchi confirmed with a simple yes. She then eagerly got to work, planting the seeds with excitement. Taniguchi, however, was amazed by how quickly the field transformed. He hadn't intended to make such a sprawling lawn. It looked fun, but the image of an elf covered in dirt made him pause. Suddenly, Chloe interrupted his thoughts, asking if they could sell the shovel and wheelbarrow. She was sure they would be a hit. Taniguchi, tense, responded that he was sure the new world had shovels and wheelbarrows too. Chloe, undeterred, agreed, but explained that while she had seen similar items, she had never encountered one as light and sturdy as their shovel, nor a wheelbarrow that moved so smoothly and straight. Taniguchi thought about it and concluded that it likely came down to the different levels of technology. The metal quality in the shovel had to be different, and the wheelbarrow's precision was something new. He decided it was worth trying, telling Chloe that they might not have much gardening gear in stock, but if she thought it was a good idea, they could sell some. He apologized for the shortage and explained that for now, it would be one item per person. Chloe cheerfully agreed and immediately started spreading the word about the shovel and wheelbarrow. Chloe first approached an ant, explaining how light the shovel was and how the wheelbarrow moved straight. The ant was amazed at the wheelbarrow's performance. Then Chloe called over some adventurers to check out the pickaxe and recommended the shovel to a merchant with a wagon. The adventurer was delighted by the lightness of the shovel, commenting on how easily it could be taken into a dungeon. The merchant was also impressed, realizing the shovel would make loading wagons much easier on bumpy roads. Chloe excitedly told Taniguchi that the adventurer was buying the shovel too. Taniguchi, while responding with a simple okay, couldn't help but be amazed at the energy of the people in this new world. One adventurer even commented that the shovel was such a steal at that price, asking Taniguchi if he was even making a profit, since he seemed just as excited as the customers. Taniguchi chuckled, but deep down he wondered if he'd messed up the yen conversion, realizing he had set the prices too low by Japanese standards. Afterward, Taniguchi sold the shovels and wheelbarrows one by one, all while pondering the lack of mass production techniques in the new world. For now, he decided to put that thought on hold. In the evening, Chloe laughed, asking, "Isn't business such a delight?" Taniguchi, exhausted but satisfied, was glad everything had sold out. Chloe, still full of energy, excitedly remarked that the Aeon Mall, run by the Japanese, was truly remarkable. Taniguchi couldn't help but notice how happy Chloe was. He shared that it wasn't just about chatting with customers and selling a few items. It was about providing them exactly what they wanted. What seemed ordinary to him could be an exciting first-time experience for someone like Chloe. He also speculated that Chloe had been thrust into the role of manager unexpectedly and had been struggling to find her footing. Chloe, in turn, started thinking about what they would sell the next day. Taniguchi mentioned that it wasn't fair, especially since none of the local hires knew much about Aeon. He warned her that delegating everything didn't mean things would run smoothly. The day had been intense. They had a total of 32 customers, generating 8,100 yen in sales. Later that night, as Taniguchi soaked in the bath, he couldn't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction. The sales hadn't even come close to the daily target, leaving him with a sense of unease. Taniguchi's mind raced as he realized that, even with great products, foot traffic was essential. Without it, he needed to come up with a strategy to attract more customers. Suddenly, a sneeze caught him off guard. He was bathing outside in the cold, and the chill made him realize he really needed to rethink his bathing situation. His thoughts shifted to the camping gear section, where he wondered if there was anything useful. He could boil water with the mysterious magic stone stove in the food court, but he quickly dismissed the idea of filling the commercial kitchen sink with hot water. It seemed like a recipe for disaster. Taniguchi shuddered at the thought of catching a cold. If that happened, it would be a disaster, so he decided it was best to head to the bathroom and get to bed quickly. As he walked, he noticed that the mall was eerily quiet. There was no one around, and he couldn't help but think about the lack of a security guard. In a world filled with monsters, it seemed strange that merchants hired bodyguards to travel, but there was no visible security in the mall. Taniguchi hadn't seen the dragon since the first day, but it wasn't just monsters that worried him. Thieves and other dangers posed a threat too. He decided he would ask Chloe about it the next morning. Feeling uneasy, Taniguchi tried to reassure himself. He had locked up everything tightly and there was no way for monsters or thieves to enter the Grand Aeon Mall, but the unease lingered. Suddenly, he heard a voice from behind, saying, "There's no way." Taniguchi froze, turning slightly to see something that resembled a black ghost. His heart raced in fear, and he shouted in panic. He bolted, wondering what that was. It wasn't a person, it looked like a dark stain, and Taniguchi questioned if it was just his imagination, a chill running down his spine. He quickly assessed his surroundings. If he went forward and turned right, he would reach his room. In a panic, he decided to make a run for it, but as soon as he moved forward, he tripped and fell to the ground. When he opened his eyes, he was stunned to see a skeleton's head right in front of him. His body went cold, and for a moment it felt like he had passed out. Taniguchi thought to himself that he couldn't handle this anymore, not in such a chaotic, cabaret-like way. Taniguchi's heart raced as he shouted in fear, only to hear a strange sound in the distance. In his panic, he fainted, but when he opened his eyes, he realized it was just his alarm ringing. He let out a relieved breath, realizing it had been a bizarre dream. Ghosts and skeletons haunting the night at Aeon Mall. Chuckling to himself, he reflected that staying up too late wasn't good for his sanity. He promised himself he'd stop doing that. Just as he thought about getting his day started, he glanced out the window. His eyes widened in shock as he saw a skeleton walking like a living person. He froze for a moment, trying to calm himself. This was a whole new world, he reminded himself. There were monsters, elves, and all sorts of magical creatures roaming freely. It wasn't so strange if skeletons and ghosts existed. If they were real, then he didn't need to fear them. But as he looked closer, he noticed the skeleton was holding a polisher. A wave of tension washed over him. Were the skeletons really cleaning the floor? To his surprise, the skeleton nodded, as if acknowledging his thoughts. Taniguchi managed a nervous smile and praised it for its work. The skeleton, however, looked tense, its bones rattling slightly as if it had heard the scream from earlier. Taniguchi was taken aback. The skeleton could talk? The translation ring was working perfectly, and he marveled at how amazing it was. He confirmed if the skeleton had heard the scream, and it responded in the affirmative. Everything's fine, Taniguchi reassured, grateful that the skeleton seemed concerned for him. The skeleton's posture relaxed, its skeletal face smiling as it showed its appreciation. After a moment of silence, it went back to its cleaning. Taniguchi let out a sigh of relief, wondering if it was real that skeletons worked as janitors. He was still processing the idea that this was part of Aoon's management system. He was also a bit furious with Iori for not mentioning this in the documents. How had he not known about the skeletons and ghosts? Later, to his surprise, Chloe casually asked Taniguchi what he didn't know about it. She explained that the skeletons handled the cleaning and security duties while the ghosts kept watch at night. Taniguchi was taken aback. This was normal? Wait, Taniguchi said, clearly agitated. Are there any other employees besides the skeletons and ghosts? As manager, I should know about these things. Chloe looked at him, puzzled, and shrugged. Oh, I forgot to introduce you to everyone. She then whistled, calling for the others to gather. Taniguchi, still confused, braced himself for whatever was coming. To his utter shock, a large army of skeletons marched toward him, and his jaw dropped. That's way too much, he exclaimed, his mind reeling. Chloe apologized, explaining that the ghosts couldn't come out during the day because of the sunlight. Taniguchi's eyes widened further. Wait, they were ghosts too? He was genuinely scared now. Aeon is too wild for making skeletons work, even after death. Just then, he heard a voice say, "We're here because we were asked to help out." Taniguchi turned, eyes wide in disbelief. What? Did the skeleton just talk to me? To his further surprise, a girl stepped out from behind the skeleton. She smiled and corrected him. Not quite. I'm not a skeleton. She knelt down in front of Taniguchi, greeting him with a formal bow. My name is Anna Maria, but you can call me Anna. Blushing at the unexpected introduction, Taniguchi quickly introduced himself and apologized for the delayed greeting. Anna had been unaware that Taniguchi was the new manager, having been stuck in the basement for quite some time. She shared her surprise, not realizing who he was. Taniguchi, on the other hand, felt a wave of relief upon seeing another human, remarking how amazing it was to finally meet someone, as he thought he was the only human at Aeon aside from Chloe, surrounded by skeletons and ghosts. Noticing Anna's confused expression and odd behavior, Taniguchi asked if something was wrong. He soon wondered if Anna had arrived with a group of skeletons, making him question whether she might also be one. Anna, however, clarified that she was once human. Taniguchi was shocked and, although scared, smiled at the revelation, finding it unbelievable that a human could no longer be human. Deep down, he wished he hadn't heard it, but he held back his true feelings. Anna then mentioned that they were dealing with a powerful undead known as a lich for the time being, and that the ghosts and other smaller creatures were his subordinates. Taniguchi, though outwardly smiling, felt an overwhelming sense of fear inside, realizing that just when he thought he'd found someone normal, things became more complicated. As they continued, Anna explained that these undead never tired or needed sleep, and that the paycheck was solely for her. Taniguchi, though still a bit shaken, responded that Aeon must be thrilled to have such talent working around the clock for a single salary. It seemed like the perfect deal, like an endless happy meal. Anna's laugh eased the tension, and Taniguchi, feeling flustered, noted how she had a more grounded reaction than Chloe, even though she was undead. He began to think that if they could overlook the undead part, it was nothing but benefits. The job required a large team, but Anna could manage everything with just her salary, which seemed like a win for him. He was eager to work with her. Anna cheerfully agreed, and Taniguchi hesitantly asked if she could keep the ghosts and skeletons away from him at night, insisting that it wasn't because he was scared. Anna laughed again, promising to make sure everyone knew. Just then, Chloe interrupted, asking if Taniguchi had finished his greetings, as she wanted him to meet someone else. Anna, confused, wondered if the young child had introduced themselves yet. Taniguchi, equally confused, looked around. Chloe whistled, then looked upwards. Taniguchi followed her gaze and saw a girl on the rooftop. His previous encounter with a dragon made him uneasy, so he hadn't dared approach it yet, questioning whether employees were allowed in such a dangerous place. Before he could think more, the girl jumped from the rooftop, leaving Taniguchi stunned and terrified. Anna casually referred to her as a little rascal. Taniguchi watched in shock as the girl landed safely on the ground. Anna remarked that jumping was unnecessary, despite the hassle of stairs. Taniguchi, overwhelmed, thought to himself that on just his third day as manager he had witnessed an employee risk their life. The girl introduced herself as Barbara, and Taniguchi, now even more tense, realized she couldn't be more than 10 years old. He shouted out, concerned that the labor standards were being violated. Chloe, confused, wondered aloud why Taniguchi kept mentioning labor standards. Barbara, cutting in, clarified that she wasn't a child, to which Chloe added that despite Barbara's appearance, she was actually older than she looked. Taniguchi, trying to make sense of it, asked if Chloe was 20. Chloe quickly responded, demanding he excuse her, and explained she had been recruited into the Knight's Order straight after graduating from the academy, making her only 18. She also proudly added that both her heart and body were pure, then asked if anyone would dare question that. Frustrated, Taniguchi acknowledged that she was 18, but now the question shifted to Barbara's age. Barbara answered that she was 140 years old, making it clear that she wasn't a child. Taniguchi was stunned by the revelation, and Chloe confirmed it. Taniguchi tried to process this, mentally noting that Barbara, though looking like a child, was actually older than his grandfather. A bit of an awkward thought crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it, relieved that he hadn't fallen into any labor law issues. Then Taniguchi turned to Anna, curious about her age. Anna replied she was 2 years old, prompting Taniguchi to ask if that was her age at the time of her death. Anna explained that as a lich, she was 21 when she became undead, but since the undead don't age, she was still 2 years old. Taniguchi nervously nodded, realizing that asking a woman her age, especially in another world, was always a delicate matter. And Taniguchi, at least he thought Anna should submit a resume, since she was technically an employee. The employees at Aeon, he observed, were elves dressed in metallic armor, even during their shifts, while the lich stayed mostly hidden in the basement. Skeletons and ghosts managed security and cleaning duties under the lich's command. Meanwhile, Barbara, despite looking like a 10-year-old, was actually 140 years old. Taniguchi, noticing horns on Barbara's head, asked what race she was. Barbara proudly answered she was a dragon, and Taniguchi, stunned, repeated the word, struggling to process it. Barbara reassured him that she could transform into a dragon, though Taniguchi, still skeptical, wondered how she could do that with her small size. Barbara, getting frustrated, insisted she could, and Anna chimed in, encouraging Taniguchi to let Barbara demonstrate. Anna called for the skeleton team captain, who approached Taniguchi only to run past him and head straight to Barbara. Taniguchi, puzzled, wondered what was going on. Chloe, noticing his confusion, asked Barbara to raise her hand, and just as she did, Anna shouted at Barbara to remember to wear underwear. Taniguchi, shocked, asked if Barbara was really stripping. Chloe quickly scolded Taniguchi, asking if he had a thing for little girls. Taniguchi, tense, told Chloe to stop thinking like that. After a brief pause, Chloe seemed to think it was fine and asked Barbara if she was ready. Barbara confirmed with a simple yes. Barbara then shot into the air like a rocket. Taniguchi, in shock, yelled that it was going to be a disaster, but as she soared, she transformed into a full dragon. Taniguchi was completely stunned, while Chloe praised Barbara, saying it was just as cool as she had imagined. It suddenly clicked for Taniguchi. Barbara was the dragon he had spotted on the rooftop that day. So, the dragon was an employee after all. Frustrated, he shouted Iori's name, demanding to know where she was and what was going on with the staffing plan.